The text arrived at 11:17 on a Tuesday night while I was sitting in my carport in Clear Lake, elbows deep in the carburetor of a 1974 Ford pickup I'd been restoring for 3 years without much urgency. 2 words, and a live location pin. 2 words I hadn't seen in over 20 years. Blue Star. My daughter Simone hadn't used those words since she was 13 years old. I remember the moment my hands went still. Not shaking, just still. The kind of stillness that happens when your nervous system understands something your brain hasn't finished processing yet. Gulf Coast heat still hung heavy in the air even at that hour, thick and unmoving the way only Houston summers managed to be. Somewhere across the street a lawn sprinkler ticked through its cycle. My coffee had gone cold an hour ago. I'm 65 years old, retired battalion chief with Houston Fire Department, 31 years on the job, widower, grandfather. Most days the biggest decision I make is whether I'm cooking on the back grill or driving down to Galveston to eat shrimp off paper plates and argue with seagulls. But the second I saw those 2 words, every quiet part of me went dark and cold and ready. Here's what people don't always understand about firefighters. We don't run on adrenaline. We run on pattern recognition. You see enough smoke, you learn what's burning before the door ever opens. And every instinct I had, trained across 31 years of pulling people out of places they couldn't pull themselves out of, said exactly one thing: get in the truck. Right now. I called first anyway, straight to voicemail, called again, nothing. By the 3rd call, I was already reversing out of the driveway. I need to tell you something before this story goes any further, because this isn't just a story about one terrible night. I've responded to structure fires where families lost everything in under 12 minutes. I've held strangers' children on front lawns while paramedics worked on their parents 20 feet away. I have seen this world at some of its worst and most irreversible angles. And nothing, not one call in 31 years, prepared me for what I walked into that night, or for what I realized I had been choosing not to see for years before it. Simone and I made the Blue Star Code the winter after her mother passed. Rhonda died from a sudden stroke at 44 years old. No warning, no goodbye, no preparation. Simone was 13 and working very hard to seem tougher than she felt. One evening after the funeral, she climbed up onto the bathroom counter the way she used to when she was small, to talk to me while I shaved. She asked me something I never forgot. She said, "Dad, what if someday I'm really scared and I can't find the right words?" So we built the code between us. Blue Star meant, don't ask questions, don't hesitate, just come. She never used it, not once in 22 years, until tonight. That's when I called Ray Delgado. Ray did 26 years with Houston PD before he retired. He's one of those men who seems perpetually half asleep until something actually needs doing, and then he is the clearest thinking person in any room. He answered on the 3rd ring, sounding like he'd been unconscious for hours. I told him 2 things. She used the code. Then, her address in Katy. Silence. Then he said, "I'll meet you at the subdivision entrance." That was it. No questions. No hesitation. I drove the Katy freeway in rain that came sideways the way it does in Houston. The kind of rain that makes highway lanes feel like suggestions. Old Tejano music played through one working speaker. I barely processed any of it. I kept thinking about small things I had filed away carefully and chosen not to examine. Simone wearing long sleeves at Easter brunch in April. The way she apologized constantly for things that weren't her fault. How Gracie, my granddaughter, would go perfectly still and silent when Marcus raised his voice even slightly. Like a child who had already learned, very early, that stillness was safer than sound. Last Thanksgiving, Marcus corrected Simone in front of 8 people at my dining room table because her green bean casserole had too much salt. He didn't yell, worse than yelling. That quiet, condescending tone people use when they want the entire room to understand that you are beneath them while maintaining the appearance of reasonableness. Simone laughed it off immediately and started clearing dishes. Her hands were trembling while she carried them to the kitchen. I saw it. I said nothing. I told myself it wasn't my place. I told myself that keeping peace was the same thing as keeping people safe. It isn't. It never was. I reached the Katy subdivision around 11:50. Ray was already parked near the entrance in his gray F-150, arms folded, face unreadable. He climbed into my cab without a word, and we drove the last half-mile in silence past identical beige houses with decorative stone accents and tiny manicured lawns, the kind of neighborhood that looks expensive from a distance and feels hollow up close. Marcus loved places like that. Loved how they looked from the outside. That should have told me something long before tonight. Simone's porch light was burning. I killed my headlights and we sat for a moment. Then we heard it, even through the rain. Shouting. Ray looked at me carefully. "You want me to call it in?" I was already scanning the property. Kitchen window lit yellow. Gracie's little bike tipped over near the garage door, Simone's car in the driveway. Then Marcus's voice cut clean through the walls in the rain. "You think your father can fix everything for you?" I got out of the truck. I don't remember crossing the lawn. I remember rain soaking through my shirt immediately and Ray matching my stride without a word. And I remember somewhere in my chest a door quietly closing on something calm and patient that I'd been keeping open for years. Because I had been patient. I had been respectful. I had stood at family dinners and told myself Marcus just had strong opinions. I had introduced him to old department contacts and helped him get meetings he wouldn't have gotten otherwise. I had liked him, genuinely liked him, once. That was the part that made everything harder. Halfway up the walk, something shattered inside the house. Then Gracie crying. Not loud. Worse than loud. That specific trapped, trying not to be heard sound children make when they've already learned that crying louder makes things worse. I opened the front door without knocking. The smell hit me before the image assembled. Whiskey and burnt food and something sharp underneath both of those. Then my eyes caught up. Simone near the dining table, one arm pressed against her ribs, her lower lip split and actively bleeding. Gracie pressed halfway behind her mother's legs, wearing little yellow pajamas with turtles printed on them, and Marcus Hale standing at the kitchen island, still holding a glass, watching me with an expression shifting in real time from surprise to calculation. "Gerald," he said quickly, "this isn't what it looks like." In 31 years responding to emergencies, I heard that sentence more times than I can count. It was always exactly what it looked like. Gracie saw me and ran. "Grandpa." I crouched and she hit my chest like she'd been waiting to fall apart for hours. She was shaking in that deep, full-body way that tells you a child has been holding fear inside for far longer than one evening. I held her against me for 3 seconds. Then I passed her gently to Ray, who had already moved up behind me, and crouched down quietly. "Hey there, little one. Think you can help me find something to drink in that kitchen?" Gracie nodded through tears and took his hand. Simone still wouldn't look directly at me. That hurt worse than anything visible in that room. Marcus spread his hands like a man explaining a billing error. Couples argue, right? Things get heated. She threw something first. He shifted his weight slightly and I watched Simone's shoulders contract in a small, reflexive flinch. Tiny movement. Invisible to someone not watching for it. I spent 31 years reading body language inside burning buildings, in stairwells and smoke-filled rooms, learning to read what people's bodies say when their mouths can't. Fear has posture. My daughter had it. She'd had it for a long time. "I'm taking Simone and Gracie with me tonight." The laugh Marcus gave was short and ugly. "You can't just walk into someone's." Simone started moving toward the hallway and Marcus grabbed her arm. Hard. She gasped. Something cold and very certain moved through me then. I walked directly up to him until he had to adjust his gaze slightly upward to meet mine. I said it quietly, almost softly. "Take your hands off my daughter." His grip loosened. He tried the smirk, the one designed to make me feel old and irrelevant. "What are you going to do, old man? Call the fire department?" Ray's voice came from the kitchen doorway, even and unhurried. "Already called someone." 12 minutes later, 2 Harris County patrol cars pulled silently to the curb. No sirens. By then, Marcus had undergone his transformation. That was the piece that frightened me most about him. Not the anger, but the switch. 1 minute he was shattering things in front of his child. The next he stood in the living room, performing the expression of an exhausted husband dealing with an overreaction, sighing at precisely the right moments, saying things like, "I really think her father escalated this situation significantly." Simone sat at the kitchen table with a bag of frozen corn against her cheek, while a deputy asked his questions patiently. "Did your husband strike you tonight?" Long pause. She looked toward Marcus. The deputy waited. "We both got upset," she whispered finally. I closed my eyes for a moment. Without her cooperation, there would be no arrest that night. The deputy encouraged separation for the evening. Simone packed 2 bags with trembling hands while Marcus followed her from room to room saying things like, "You're really doing this, and Gracie needs stability, and you're going to regret putting her through this." Each sentence engineered, each one precise. Men like Marcus don't need to win the argument. They just need everyone else to run out of energy before they do. As Simone zipped Gracie's small backpack near the front door, Marcus suddenly softened his voice entirely. "Simone, come on, baby." For half a second I watched confusion cross my daughter's face, that terrible, familiar pull backward that people feel when the person who has been hurting them suddenly sounds like the person they married. Then Gracie reached up in the dark hallway and found her mother's hand. We left. The drive back to Clear Lake was quiet except for the wipers and the sound of Gracie eventually going still in the back seat, exhausted past the point of crying. Ray followed behind us in his F-150 until I pulled into my neighborhood near the water. Simone used to love this neighborhood when she was small. Old ranch houses, boats rocking in their slips behind the backyard fences, salt air coming off the bay when the wind was right. Back when life made sense to both of us in simpler ways. Gracie fell asleep on my couch within minutes of arriving. Ray quietly found extra blankets. Simone stood in my kitchen staring at the coffee maker like she'd temporarily forgotten how the world worked. I made the coffee anyway. She wrapped both hands around the mug and held it without drinking for a very long time. Ray left around 2 in the morning. Before going, he stopped beside me on the front porch. "This didn't start tonight," he said quietly. "No." "How long do you think?" I looked through the window at Simone sitting motionless at my table. "Longer than I let myself admit," I told him. Ray nodded once. "I'll start pulling public records in the morning." Then he disappeared into the dark. I didn't sleep. Honestly, if you're watching this and you've ever sat alone in a dark kitchen at 4 in the morning replaying every small moment you softened because confronting it felt uncomfortable, you already know exactly what that night felt like. Every warning sign I'd cataloged and filed and moved past without action. Every time I told myself it wasn't my place. Every time Simone said, "Please don't make this worse," Dad and I believed keeping the peace was the same as keeping her safe. The answer to the question that visits you at 4 in the morning is always the same. It isn't. It was never the same thing. And knowing that doesn't make the knowledge easier to carry. Simone walked into the kitchen around 4:15 wearing one of her old high school sweatshirts she'd kept at my house for years. We sat across from each other in the dark for a long time. Then she asked me something I wasn't ready for. She said, "Do you think less of me for staying?" That question nearly shattered me completely. "I hate that you thought you had to ask me that," I told her. And that's when she started crying. Not dramatic crying, exhausted crying. The kind that comes when a person has held the edges of themselves together for so long that finally letting go feels almost physical. Over the next hour, pieces came out slowly. Marcus controlled nearly every account they shared, checked her phone regularly, picked arguments before family events so she would seem unstable to outside observers afterward, criticized her weight, her parenting, her decisions for days at a stretch without stopping. And when he drank, the floor fell out from under everything. "How long?" I asked. She looked at her untouched coffee for a long time. "He hit me the first time when Gracie was 18 months old. Something broke open in my chest. I stood up too fast, walked straight to the garage, and hit the side of my metal storage cabinet hard enough to leave a dent and shoot pain from my knuckles to my elbow." I stood in the dark breathing. A few seconds later, Simone appeared in the doorway. She said quietly, "You never hit Mom." "I know," I told her, "but apparently I missed a hell of a lot of everything else." The following afternoon, Ray came by with a legal pad and 2 paper bags of food. He sat at my dining table and spread out documents he'd pulled through legitimate public record channels. Repeated hotel charges, luxury purchases, restaurant bills Simone had never seen on any shared statement. Then he slid a printed photo across the table. A woman in a red dress laughing beside Marcus at a rooftop event in downtown Houston. "Diane Castillo," Ray said. "Her husband is a commercial real estate attorney in Midtown." Simone stared at the photo for a long time without speaking. "I kept thinking I was making it up," she said finally. "That's not everything," Ray added. He handed me another page. Preliminary divorce consultation records, asset division projections. My stomach turned. Marcus had been planning an exit while quietly draining the accounts. Then came the sentence that knocked the floor out from under me. Simone looked at me with something I can only describe as pure shame and said, "Dad, he used Gracie's education fund." I thought I had misheard her. I asked her to repeat it. She told me Marcus had gradually manipulated her into signing digital transfers, connected to investment accounts and refinancing paperwork, sometimes late at night after arguments when she was exhausted, sometimes buried inside legitimate tax documents he told her were routine. Classic overload. Confuse a person until they stop asking questions, until the cost of understanding is higher than the cost of trust. I sat down at the kitchen table because my legs didn't feel reliable. That account wasn't just savings. I started it the week Simone graduated high school. Every birthday, every Christmas, every overtime shift I picked up after Rhonda died because I needed something to do with my hands at midnight and couldn't sleep anyway. I built that fund because I wanted one thing in this family that nothing could touch. Something that said, whatever else life takes, this child has a future that is entirely her own. And Marcus had drained most of it on hotel rooms and restaurant dinners and resort weekends with another man's wife. Ray rubbed a hand slowly across his jaw. He also ran transfers through a private business investment account tied to his company bonuses. He slid another page toward me. I looked at the numbers. The heat crawling up into my throat wasn't quite rage. It was something worse than rage. Shame. Because I had helped this man. I'd opened doors for him through old department contacts, co-signed his professional references, loaned him money Simone never found out about, twice, because I told myself I was supporting my daughter's family. Meanwhile, Simone was clipping grocery coupons and reusing Gracie's school supplies, while Marcus charged resort weekends to corporate expense reports. Simone said quietly, "You warned me once." I looked up. She said, "That Thanksgiving, you asked if he embarrassed me on purpose. You said, a man who enjoys humiliating you in public usually does worse in private." I remembered that conversation exactly. She had been loading my dishwasher while Marcus laughed too loudly in the living room. She defended him for 15 straight minutes afterward. Now she sat at my kitchen table looking hollowed out by years of her own loyalty. "I should have listened," she said. "No," I told her. "I should have pushed harder. I want to be honest with you about something. I've told this story several times since it happened, and I always pause at this part, because there is a version of me that wants to present the moment I walked through that door as a kind of uncomplicated rescue. But the truth is I showed up late. I showed up after years of choosing comfortable distance over difficult questions. The version of me that drove down the Katy freeway that night should have made that same drive years earlier, in daylight, without a distress code. That's the thing nobody tells you about loving someone through a situation like this. Your failures don't disappear because you eventually showed up. They just get quieter. That afternoon, Ray connected us with an attorney named Patricia Navarro. Patricia was in her mid-50s, gray streaked through black hair, reading glasses she seemed to look over rather than through, and a particular kind of calm that comes from having seen every version of this before, and choosing to still take each one seriously. She stopped when she walked in and looked at me with a slight smile. "You probably don't remember my uncle," she said. "Victor Navarro, Station 63, 1999. I stared for a second before it clicked. "Big Victor," I said. She laughed. "He still tells people about that warehouse fire on Westheimer. Your crew pulled him out of the 3rd floor. I remember every second of that night," I told her. That brief warmth disappeared the moment she opened Simone's paperwork. For nearly 2 hours, she reviewed bank transfers, text, screenshots, account statements, and the divorce consultation records. When she was done, she looked directly at Simone. "What your husband has likely committed goes well beyond infidelity, financial abuse, fraudulent misrepresentation on joint accounts, potentially criminal misuse of funds connected to a minor's education account." Simone said, "He always told me it didn't matter legally because we were married." Patricia shook her head once. "That is not how this works." Then Simone asked the question that was underneath everything else she'd said. "What if he uses custody to maintain control?" Patricia's voice softened slightly. "Family courts take documented abuse and financial deception very seriously, especially when a child's welfare is directly involved." Simone nodded, but I could see it in her face. The door was standing open and she hadn't fully believed yet that she was allowed to walk through it. If you have ever watched someone you love stand at an open door they cannot make themselves step through, you understand that moment, not because they are weak, but because the person who hurt them spent years making the world outside that door feel more frightening than the pain inside it. That's what abuse actually builds. Not chains. A geography of doubt. Over the following week, small things shifted. Simone opened her own checking account, changed every password, started answering calls from friends she'd gradually stopped returning over the years. One afternoon I heard her laughing in my backyard with a former colleague on the phone, while Gracie chased soap bubbles through the grass. Real laughter. The first I had heard from my daughter in a very long time. Marcus, meanwhile, became unpredictable. Apologetic one day, threatening the next. I miss my family. Then, your grandfather is poisoning you against me. Then, Gracie deserves both parents present. Then, and this one I read while parked at a gas station on I-10 and had to sit with for a long time before I trusted my hands. You think anyone else will want you now. At 65 years old you understand something you don't at 30. A decision made at the peak of anger can erase 50 years of discipline in 30 seconds. So I sat in that parking lot and listened to a sports radio station I had no interest in until the feeling settled. One evening Patricia arrived at my house with a folder Ray had helped her compile. Corporate expense reports, reimbursement claims for hotels, restaurant dinners, a private apartment, weekend trips to properties Marcus had no business visiting. Not cinematic fraud, realistic greed. The kind built on the quiet belief that small thefts accumulate slowly enough that no one will ever notice until it's too late to matter. Ray provided the documentation to Marcus's employer through appropriate channels. No confrontation, no theater, just records arriving where they needed to arrive. Separately, Diane Castillo's husband, a midtown commercial attorney named Daniel Mercer, received information connecting Marcus to the affair. No one coordinated for drama. Real consequences don't usually arrive all at once. Pressure builds quietly first. Patricia closed the folder and looked at Simone steadily. The only question remaining is whether you're ready to stop protecting him. The room went entirely still. Outside, I could hear Gracie riding her bike in slow circles in the driveway, singing something to herself in the evening light. Simone stared at the paperwork for a long time. Then she exhaled and nodded once. 3 weeks later, Marcus Hale walked into the Houston Children's Foundation Gala at the Marriott Marquis downtown like a man who believed his life was on an upswing. That was the tragic piece of it. He still thought he was the smartest person in every room he entered. I kept it simple that evening. Dark blazer, gray slacks, old watch Rhonda gave me on our 25th anniversary. No insignia, no department pins. Half the room probably assumed I was somebody's retired uncle along for the salmon. Perfect. Ray stood near the back bar with club soda looking like a man waiting on a delayed flight. Patricia moved through the crowd the way she moved through everything, quietly, efficiently, with the particular calm of someone already several moves ahead. Marcus arrived in a charcoal suit with a pocket square, and the specific energy of a man auditioning for a version of himself that was still possible. Handshakes and wide smiles and a big laugh you could hear from across the ballroom. Diane Castillo walked beside him in a silver dress. People noticed. Most pretended not to. That is Houston professional society. Everyone sees everything. Nobody says it out loud until there is blood in the water. I watched Marcus work the room for a while. At one point he was talking loudly enough that I could hear from 40 feet away. Big promotion coming through next quarter. They finally recognized what I bring to the table. Ray materialized beside me without me noticing him approach. That man could drown in 2 feet of water and still think he discovered swimming. I almost smiled. Around 8 o'clock, Marcus spotted me near the bar. His expression shifted not to fear, to annoyance. The look of someone who finds muddy boots on their clean floor. He crossed toward me with a bourbon glass already in hand. Didn't expect to see you here, Gerald. I sipped my iced water. How's Katy traffic treating you these days? That irritated him immediately because it wasn't the reaction he'd been preparing for. Diane Castillo stood beside him looking like she'd rather be anywhere else on earth. Marcus leaned slightly toward me. Simone is going through a really difficult emotional period right now. You know that, right? Set up. He wanted witnesses to hear his framing first. I looked him directly in the eye. My daughter is doing better than she has in years. His jaw tightened for exactly half a second before the practiced smile returned. Well, we all find our comfort stories. He walked away, but I noticed him glance back twice. By 8:30, things were already shifting beneath the surface of that ballroom. Certain executives who had been warm earlier were now absorbed by their phones. Diane kept scanning the room with a nervous frequency that didn't match the occasion. Marcus was drinking faster and talking louder, trying to hold the center of every conversation through volume. Then Daniel Mercer walked in, tall man, mid-40s, controlled fury written into every line of his posture. He walked directly to Diane. No raised voice, no public scene, just 4 words, low and final. "We need to leave now." Diane went white immediately. Marcus moved in fast. "Daniel, this isn't the..." The man looked at Marcus with complete and undisguised disgust. "6 months of hotel rooms your company paid for. I think anywhere works fine for this conversation." Several nearby conversations stopped completely. That is the nature of a public moment of truth. People pretend not to stare while staring harder than ever. Across the ballroom, 2 men in dark suits entered through a side entrance. Company investigators. Right on schedule. One approached Marcus carefully. "Mr. Hale, we need a private word regarding some expense account irregularities." Marcus laughed too loudly and too quickly. "About what exactly?" His voice cracked on the second word. People nearby became very interested in their dessert plates. Marcus looked around the room, searching for control that no longer existed anywhere inside it. Then he saw Simone. She had just entered beside Patricia. Simple navy dress, hair pulled back. No apology in her posture, no fear in her face. Just presence. And the moment Marcus registered that expression, calm, grounded, done, I watched something behind his eyes shift into something close to panic. He crossed the ballroom toward her. "Simone, tell them this has been completely blown out of his voice," was climbing now, and he could hear it. Everyone could hear it, and he could not stop it. His perfect surface was cracking too fast for him to hold together. She stood completely still and waited for him to finish. Then she said it. "I stayed silent for years, Marcus." The ballroom went almost completely quiet. Her voice did not shake. It did not rise. It carried across that room the way a calm voice always carries further than a loud one. "I was protecting you." She let that land for a moment. "And I am done doing that." Simple, final. The sentence that ended 8 years of carefully maintained silence, spoken in front of every person he had used as social currency. Marcus looked at me then, not angry, desperate, like maybe another man could still reach into this room and pull him back from the edge of everything he'd built and everything he'd already destroyed. I said nothing at all. Security had already begun drifting in from both sides of the room. As they walked Marcus toward the exit, he kept looking back, like the room owed him something, like this was happening to him rather than because of him. But the truth was always simpler than his version of events. His lies had simply run out of places to stand. The legal process moved slower than television prepares anyone for. Fraud investigations, internal corporate audits, divorce proceedings, asset reviews, all of it grinding through institutions at the pace of institutions. Marcus's company terminated him quietly after confirming the expense abuse. The divorce took the better part of a year. Things moved. Things changed, just not fast. About 4 months after the gala, I was standing barefoot in my kitchen on a Saturday morning making blueberry pancakes when Gracie appeared at the counter and began explaining with considerable authority that dolphins have better emotional maturity than sharks. Sharks, she informed me, just bite things without thinking. Dolphins consider their feelings first. I didn't argue with her. Saturday mornings had become our standing arrangement by then. Cartoons on low volume, coffee going before sunrise, Gracie stealing chocolate chips from the bag on the counter. When she thought I wasn't watching, I was always watching. I just liked letting her think otherwise. Simone came in wearing sweatpants and one of my old department hoodies, mug in both hands, hair pulled back. There was color in her face that morning. Real color. That still caught me off guard sometimes, how visible the lifting of fear is once it finally, fully goes. She looked tired the way ordinary people look tired. Parent tired. Work tired. Human tired. Not frightened. "Therapy okay this week?" I asked carefully. She nodded. "Hard," she said. "But different hard. Better hard. That's the part people don't say enough. Leaving isn't the finish line. Sometimes it's just the place where the real repair work finally gets permission to begin." I rebuilt Gracie's education account. Not all at once. A fire department pension is comfortable but not extravagant. But between recovered settlement funds Patricia helped secure and careful restructuring over several months, Gracie's future stopped feeling stolen. One afternoon she was riding her bike crookedly down my driveway while Simone jogged alongside her, laughing. "Keep pedaling, Gracie." "I am pedaling. You're staring at the mailbox." They made it to the end of the driveway, and back twice before Gracie finally held her balance on her own. I sat on the porch pretending to read. Actual peace. Not silence covering pain. Not people walking carefully around someone who might break. Real, unremarkable, ordinary peace. The kind you don't recognize fully until you've spent enough time around its absence. This story taught me something I didn't know. I still needed to learn at 65. Showing up is not enough. Showing up earlier is the whole job. The mistake people make, the one I made, is believing that respecting someone's privacy is the same as protecting them. It isn't. Sometimes love means asking the uncomfortable question before it becomes the impossible one. Sometimes it means saying, "I see something that worries me, and I care about you too much to pretend I don't." The question I'd ask you to sit with is this: is there someone in your life right now who seems to be making themselves smaller, quieter, someone whose visits are getting shorter and whose explanations are getting longer? Don't file it away. Ask. Marcus called once more near the end of summer. Blocked number. I answered before recognizing the voice. He sounded smaller than I remembered, worn down in a way that had nothing theatrical left in it. He said, "Can I speak to Simone?" "No." A long silence. Then, "I did love her." I looked out through the back door toward the water behind the fence. "I think you probably did," I told him. That seemed to genuinely confuse him because people like Marcus believe love is a defense. It isn't. It was never a defense. "You still destroyed her," I said. Then I hung up quietly. No anger. No satisfaction either, really. Just the sound of a door closing on something that should have ended years before it did. A few weeks after that, Gracie and I were sitting on the dock eating popsicles that were melting faster than either of us could keep up with in the August heat. She looked at me with that specific gravity that means an important question is forming. "Grandpa." "Yeah, sweetheart. Mom says you saved us." I laughed softly. "No," I told her. "I just drove somewhere when I was supposed to." She thought about that with full seriousness for a moment, then nodded once like I'd given her something useful, and went back to her popsicle. That night, after everyone was asleep, I sat alone on the back porch with the last cup of coffee, listening to the boats rocking quietly in their slips in the dark water beyond the fence line. Crickets, a radio somewhere across the marina, a light breeze off the bay finally cool enough to mean something. Quiet, but the earned kind of quiet. The kind that feels like something rather than just the absence of noise. If this story stayed with you, I want to hear from you. Drop a 1-inch the comments if you think Gerald was right to go straight to that house without waiting for police. Drop a 2 if you think he should have confronted Marcus years earlier when he first saw the warning signs at Thanksgiving. Drop a 3 if Simone's words at that gala, quiet, certain, unhurried, final, are the moment you'll carry longest from this story. And tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now, because this channel reaches people in places I still can't quite believe. And every single comment is a reminder of why these stories matter. If you've ever filed something away because confronting it felt like overstepping, you already understand exactly what that 4 in the morning felt like. You're not alone in that. If this one meant something to you, please subscribe. New stories go up every week, and everyone gets told because someone somewhere needed to hear that they weren't the only one. I'll see you in the next one. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Houston, Texas to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is entirely coincidental.